The agricultural sector was the one that, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I would have said, I don't even really see the path there. And admittedly, we're still in early days, but there's a lot of companies like Impossible Foods, Beyond Meat, but many others as well, that are looking at new ways of doing food production. Greenhouse gas emissions, if you convert them into CO2 equivalents, sadly are just going up like this. You get little wiggles for economic depression, or the pandemic has brought them down somewhere between 5 and 10%. But as the world's developed, we keep going up, and yet our goal is to go down. And so having that number 51 billion in mind allows you to look at any intervention and see as a percentage of 51 billion how impactful that is. The two other metrics that I'd love for people to take away from the book, one is understanding the sectors of emission, and that we've got a slide we could put up quickly here to show that. That shows people it's not just electricity and passenger cars. Transportation includes aviation. You've got agriculture at 19%, heating and cooling 7%. But the one that people are probably the least aware of is the biggest slice there, which is that manufacturing piece that includes cement and steel. And in a way, we've over-focused, or well, not over, we put most of our efforts into the easier things like passenger cars and renewable energy sources. We also need to get going on the hard stuff, because if your goal is zero, you don't get to skip anything. The final metric that maybe we'll talk about more is this idea of how expensive is it to do things in a green way. And so I compare like buying a gasoline car to an electric car. And there, the green premium, we can show this slide, the green premium is not that high. And because the volume has gone up and the competition is going up, that green premium over the next 10 to 15 years with cheaper batteries, better range, that will go to zero. Whereas for something like cement, you see that a ton costs almost twice as much. And so, 51 billion source of emission, and the idea that this green premium is the metric that we have to drive down so that we can say to all the countries of the world, hey, buy the green stuff in 2050, and they won't push back because of the incredible increased cost that right now they would have to pay.
That's great, thanks, Bill. Look, I think this is a pretty upbeat book. I mean, you don't actually pull any punches about how difficult it is going to be to get to net zero, but on the other hand, you do set out solutions on the road to getting to net zero. And I very much share your view that I think technology is going to be very much part of that solution. So it'd be really great. I mean, you talked about electric vehicles just now, but can you highlight some of the other technologies which you feel are going to be part of our net zero future?
Yeah, the most mature would be the electric cars with the lithium-ion battery, the solar and land-based wind. Kind of in the middle are things like offshore wind, and there the UK is a leader in saying, okay, we're going to buy a lot of this. Who can give it to us at the lowest green premium? And the beauty of that is that then there will be innovation. How do you anchor those things so they stay in the storm? And, how do you connect the electricity? That green premium has started to come down. And for the entire world, offshore wind, I think can be a big thing. Electric buses, China's doing a lot of the pioneering work there, making sure that the cost and how they work when it's hot and cold, but the volume is going up. Then we have some things that are at the very earliest stages, and that's unfortunately where steel and cement come in, is that there's essentially no green steel or green cement today. And so we need to have not just more R&D money and more venture capital type money, but we also need buyers, so we need governments, we need companies that are trying to contribute to society when they build new buildings to say, okay, we're going to buy green cement, green steel, so that we can start down that catalytic learning path. And that how we bring those kind of policies together. I'm very excited that the COP will be a time where we can announce example projects that are under this catalyst framework, and so people can see that, okay, we really are trying and have a plan for every area of emission.
Yeah, so Bill, I mean, you talk about the fact that in the UK we now, in a fairly short order, have got the biggest offshore wind market in the world. And that's because we created a mechanism for investors to be able to invest. And I think that's kind of where we also need to be going with some of these other technologies. But you referenced COP. I'm spending a lot of my time traveling around meeting governments. And earlier this week, I was in Delhi and I met Prime Minister Modi. And during our conversation, he referenced mission innovation and he referenced working with you. And I think it'd be great if you could tell us all a little bit about mission innovation and how it came about and what we're trying to achieve with that.
Yeah, so prior to the 2015 Paris meeting, I was talking with President Hollande and President Obama and President Modi, sort of saying, hey, the near-term commitments where you drive the low green premium stuff to higher scale, that is so necessary and so important, but that alone won't get us to zero. We need part of these conferences to look at, are we raising our R&D budgets, and are we raising the high-risk capital that's going to jump in and grab those things out of the laboratory? And it was fantastic that President Modi, who actually named this initiative Mission Innovation, he agreed to come to the entire event. And so we had the announcement. The government's committed to raise their energy R&D budgets. The UK's done very well in that, which is fantastic. Many others haven't met their doubling, but the total increase has been quite impressive. And my part there was to commit to this breakthrough energy effort that included a very specially designed venture group that would only go after climate innovation. And we've invested now in 40 companies. We've just raised a second $1 billion fund, which will invest in another 40 companies. And so that supply of innovation is going well. And I do give the 2015 conference credit for saying to people, it's the near term, but it's also this innovation. And how we highlight some of these advances in Glasgow, so people get that it won't just be brute force trillions of dollars. It will be creating new jobs around these new approaches that have other benefits, like no local pollution, which coal plants have that. So that sense of, okay, how do we coordinate all the different green hydrogen projects that are out there and make sure we're picking things that really have a chance of getting to be very low cost. That's a super important topic because of all the money, the Build Back Better money, making sure we get the maximum benefit from that.
Yeah. Well, I think you are so right when you say that we need to talk about green growth. I mean, in the UK, we use the statistic that over the last 30 years, we've grown our economy by 75% and cut emissions by 43%. So it is possible, and countries around the world are doing it. But when it comes to transforming industries, and you talked a little bit about this earlier, and decarbonizing them, some of course are much easier than others. Have you actually been a bit surprised at which industries have moved faster than others?
Yes, the agricultural sector was the one that, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I would have said, I don't even really see the path there. And admittedly, we're still in early days, but there's a lot of companies like Impossible Foods, Beyond Meat, but many others as well, that are looking at new ways of doing food production that can get rid of the slaughtering animals and the methane and the manure and a variety of things that cause those to be highly emitting. So I'm seeing much more hope there. And, you know, that's why it's really the aviation fuel, the steel and the cement that, you know, sadly, just if you take those three, you know, you're up at almost 20% of emissions. Those are the ones that still don't get enough focus. So when we did our first Breakthrough Energy Fund, storage and food, actually, we had more opportunities than we expected. In our second fund, we'll really try and go after direct air capture, clean hydrogen, steel and cement a lot more, because, you know, if your goal is zero, you have to hit all the different categories. You don't get to say, okay, that one's too hard, we'll, you know, not do it. And the industrial economy is, you know, everything is so cheap that people almost don't pay attention. And now, you know, we need to renew our skills and find new approaches.
So what are the toughest technological challenges ahead of us? I mean, what is going to make it really difficult to get to that net zero?
Well, one of the things that is tricky, and the United States is experiencing a little bit of this with our Midwest weather challenge right now, is that the electricity sector, even as it uses onshore wind, offshore wind, and solar, we need to maintain reliability. And even during crazy weather events like big cold fronts or heat waves. And that's going to mean that we have to build a lot more transmission, which is politically can be difficult to get permitted. It also is going to mean we either need to store a lot of energy for those tough periods, which would take a miraculous invention to be able to store that much, or up to 25% of our sources will have to be non-weather dependent and yet green. And that's where, you know, the question of is, can nuclear be cheap enough and safe enough? And can we get the public acceptance of that to be part of this energy ecosystem? It's a huge question. You know, we have to pursue both the storage miracle and nuclear to make sure that one of them succeeds, because, you know, the climate, just accepting defeat on this would, you know, be so terrible for us. So I do think energy reliability, that's one where the open source model that Breakthrough Energy is doing will let people model the grid. David Mackay, who is part of the UK government, sadly passed away, he started this idea of, okay, let's get models going so that people can say, okay, which sources of energy do they like and how much transmission do they like? And in 2050, will it be cheap and green and reliable? So that's one that people may underestimate how tough the reliability will be, and yet it's so critical.
Thank you for that. And look, we've all been living through this unprecedented time over the last year through this pandemic. And actually, we've seen real urgency from many governments and scientists in the business community to support jobs, support livelihoods, to support vaccine development and treatment development. It'd be quite interesting. Can you tell us your observations in terms of the approaches that have been taken to responding to the COVID-19 pandemic and the responses being taken to responding to climate change? You know, what's the difference? Should we have the same urgency?
Yeah, I think they both are the same in that we rely on our government to have very smart people think out ahead for problems we might face. So, you know, because there will be earthquakes, we have building codes, and we're willing to make buildings more expensive to build. So when that earthquake comes, very few people die. We want to get ready for potential wars, and so we do war simulations and try out, okay, who's going to be ready, what flaws might we have. In both the case of the pandemic and climate, you know, we can say our governments have not yet put enough resource into that. You know, I spoke out in 2015 after Ebola about the pandemic risk and saying we're not ready, and some things were done. The UK Wellcome Trust, my foundation, Japan and Norway formed a group called CEPI, which has been the biggest funder of these coronavirus vaccines after the US government. The one category in this pandemic that the US gets good grade is they did deploy a lot of money for the vaccine very quickly. Now, in some ways, the pandemic and climate are different because the pandemic, as awful as it's been, it's one innovation, the vaccine will, as we get it out, and make sure people feel comfortable with it, it will end this pandemic. With climate, the negative effects the super negative effects get worse and worse every year. And so the really bad stuff of, natural ecosystems dying off and everybody near the equator not being able to work outdoors, so they have to migrate into other countries, that's more towards the end of the century that it gets super dire. And so getting people to take action now for something that's, their kids and grandkids would have a tragic situation, that's more tricky. And we have to have cooperation, because no matter where the emissions take place, it affects the entire world. So this is a tougher one, but people do expect government to show them and use innovation as the tool that can avoid the problem.